So I'm Kathy Mayfield, and we are here at Wesleyan Potters to have a conversation with Lois Eldridge, who is one of our senior and most cherished members of Wesleyan Potters. She recently turned 90 years old.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Can't believe it.
And she has been here at the Pottery since
1963.
1963. So that is even, that's older than me, what, like 55 years, I guess. So to just start the conversation, how did you first get into art?
Well, I think that I've always been a museum goer. I was trained as a teacher. I was a Spanish teacher, Spanish, French, English, and history in North Dakota, Minnesota, Bogota, Colombia, and Connecticut. And I have always balanced that with a lot of travel, and a lot of travel took me to museums. And I noticed through the years that I was just as interested in that hallway at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where you go down that row and see all the ancient pottery, as I was in the Rembrandts or the Picassos on the wall. And little by little I would go more often to that section of the museum to see those ancient artifacts. And I think that was a very important influence. I hated to leave a bowl that's in that Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's a 6th century Chinese porcelain bowl that's in one of the display cases. So I think that I've had an appreciation for the fine arts, and especially that part of them, for an awfully long time. Serious museum going around the world with my travels.
When did you first start pottery?
Well, I was teaching at Glastonbury High School, and a friend said she was taking pottery lessons with Fred Rust at Rusty Kiln in Wethersfield. And she said, "Why don't you come with me?" And I said, "I think I will." And so we started with Fred Rust, and that's where I made my first pots. And the same, no, it was before that, in Westport, when we lived in Fairfield. We went to the pottery place to buy breakfast dishes for our home. And there in the window was a young man from Italy throwing pottery on a wheel. And I told my husband to leave me there. So I spent about 4 hours that afternoon just watching that young man. So I think that was quite an influence. I was just totally fascinated. So then we went to an art show in Middlefield, and there was Arthur and Marjorie Schultz, our members. And we were standing in front of the same artworks quite often. And we started talking, and they said, "Well, come to the pottery, we'll take you around and show you." So Marjorie and Arthur met me one day and took me around the pottery, and that very day I signed up for classes. So I think that was 1963.
And where was the pottery then? Was it here in this building?
No, we were in Knowles Avenue,
Okay.
that building right by the stadium. I think it's been torn down since then. And the thing that we did then was mix our own clay in great containers, and you took your turns mixing clay whether you were in a class or a member. See, it was in Knowles Avenue that Barbara McClellan had the bathtub incident. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not heard that story.
We had a little bathroom in that building, and the leaders thought we could turn this into a hand building area, but we have to get rid of the bathtub. And Barbara McClellan said, "Well, that's no problem." We open the window, we upend the bathtub, and we lift it up and take it out the window. So Mary sees Elsie Salonia, and I thought we should go down and see where it's going to land and what it's going to land on. So we're down there surveying that when suddenly the window opens and out comes the Barbara was very strong and innovative and had her own idea of how to do things. She was a woman of action. That was our first, and then Pease Avenue was the dry cleaning business turned into a pottery. Mary Risley story happened. Gordon Helander, Bob Brooks, Bob Chester, Ann Highland. We were all students of Mary Risley on that Monday night class. I was very lucky to be in that room with all those people. And it's her fault I make pears. She had a she said, sculpt a warm-up. She had warm-up things quite often at the beginning of class. Sculpt a fruit that tells me about yourself. So I said, I'm a pear.
Mm-hmm. So do you have anything you would think was an important milestone for you artistically? Any particular thing that you did, or a show, or an event, or somebody you met that you think
Well,
was
the people, of course, and it was just an outstanding experience to know Mickey Sequencia. There's a store downtown on Main Street that had a door here and two big show windows here and here. And Hadassah was doing a show on that parking lot, and I signed up for the Hadassah show. And they said, you can bring your pots and put them in that window to advertise the show. So on a certain Monday morning, I showed up with my pottery, and Mickey showed up with his friend Lane Johnson to put his work in the other side, in that window. That's when I met Mickey. And then when I showed up on Saturday for the show, his booth happened to be right by mine. So we spent Saturday and Sunday talking and enjoying each other's work. And he loved the beads that I was selling. We traded, and I brought clay and we made beads on Sunday afternoon when things were quieter. And Monday morning he showed up with Lane to talk about Mickey studying with me. So then Mickey decided to study with me for 2 years in my basement. And then I talked him into membership in our classes down here. But it was an experience knowing people like Mickey and Bob. And those people were my students for 2 years at home. And Kathy Orr, Denny Jones. I'm pretty proud of that list. You know. And the clay unites people. It didn't take me long to understand that. There's something both physical and cerebral about the experience of doing clay with people. And I only had one wheel, so in the basement we're sitting side by side, working in that bowl or whatever it is. And upstairs we're having our coffee or our tea and making sketches and talking design, especially with Bob Brooks, especially with Mickey. He always had a little notebook where he had some ideas. So that was a very special time for me and very exciting for some of the people. And Mary Risley, I always wondered if this was my friend or my teacher or some of each, because we connected very, very quickly. And I think I sensed right away that she cared that I made some progress, because she was always so attentive to what I was doing and what I needed to do. And Mary Cease, I don't know how I could admire someone more than Mary Cease. I think she's one of the brightest people we ever had as a member. And she took so many courses. I don't know, are you aware that she did? One of her professors was at the show one year, and he said, "Do you know what Mary does?" And I said, "What?" Well, she had gone through philosophy and psychology and archaeology and all of these courses, not just the course, but the program. She could have graduated, he said, at any one of those. And her mind was just such an amazing to hear her talk. I applied for membership at Silvermine Guild down in New Haven, as Betsy Tanzer did, as many people did. Eileen Muller. Eileen was rejected, Betsy was rejected, I was rejected, and a year later, Mary was on the American Craft Council board, and she was at a meeting in New York City, and another director said, that was from Silvermine said, well, Mary, we're looking for more craftspeople. Could you recommend a potter? And Mary said, yes, I can, and she recommended me. So after this rejection, I slipped in the side door because Mary Cease recommended me to be a member. I didn't go through jury. I just showed up with my work, and I've been a member ever since. And they honored me in March with a show with the other legacies, they called us, people that had been there forever. And they published a little booklet with our work in it and had a little reception for us. So that was my Silvermine story, and I thank it to Mary. I'm very proud of the idea that children come into our building and teenagers. And what do they see? They see all of us at various ages still walking in that building with finding the lump of clay or the weaving upstairs, the jewelry pounding in the back. I think that's very, very healthy for children to see that and to be part of it. Oh yes, Mr. Blanchard, yes. He did not like me or my pottery. I have loved birds since I was a child. In North Dakota, our farm was across a migration sanctuary of birds flying from Canada south, right across the road from our farm. So when I was supposed to be weeding the garden, I was over there watching birds land on the water. And as I say, I've loved birds for my whole life. So when I started making birds, Al didn't like it because
competition.
And he is so right in the criticism he made often that my design was too poor and it had no space on the shelves in the kiln room. And please remove it. Don't put that. It's one of my favorite things to do when I go over to glaze and I've got my pots glazed and on the shelf. I turn around and I see that class scene in front of me on that side, all the people on the wheels, and I have this both curiosity and great feeling of what it means for them to come into our building and make that bowl or that cup or that plate. And so they finish, they clean up their wheel and they go home, and what have we given them? I think that it's a very satisfied feeling that that we're providing that for so many people year after year. And I just love to look at that whole little square there full of pottery and wheels and people, and I just take pleasure in that. You see the concentration, the focus, whatever there's going on in their life is put aside, and here they are. I like that very much.
I know you've always been involved and interested in other artists, including ceramic people, but also painters. If you had a choice, who would you love to interview?
El Greco.
El Greco.
I started my Spanish in high school, and my teacher, Dorothy Kenny, asked us to study the Spanish painters. And Dorothy Kenny had folders of different painters, and so I just took El Greco as a random, and I started a study that it still goes on, because I used him for my report for high school and through college in 2 universities. Whenever I had to do something, I would do El Greco and Dominicus Theotokopoulos. And so I have a great big book, and I've read Nikos Kazantzakis' biography of El Greco. I have a copy. And so I would love to. And I had a very happy trip to Spain and went to Toledo, of course, and sat in that church where the El Tiro de São Tomás, yes.
What lessons has pottery taught you about life?
That's a good way of asking.
I hope it's patience, because I think the clay has a great deal. There's a timing, and if you don't pay attention to that timing,
Sure.
you're in trouble. So I had some of the greatest writers in Spanish and literature, and at Wesleyan Potters, I got to know some of the greatest potters. And Mary Cease asked me one time, "Well, Lois, you do a good job of the workshop, but why do you volunteer?" And I said, "Well, it's very easy. I get free workshop. And I get to know the workshop leaders better than if I just sat in their class." Yeah. So not only did I know the best writers in the Spanish literature world, but the best potters in the pottery world, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that. Imagine that I got to know Otto and Vivica Heino and Beatrice Wood and David Shader and Peter Volkas and on and on and on. I'm very amazed sometimes that I got to know them a little bit, not a lot. But I visited the Heinos 3 times in California, and I visited Beatrice Wood twice. I remember one thing that I was going to tell about Gary O'Neill, and I've told many people the connection that I have with Gary. It was at Pease Avenue, and his art teacher brought him to our show, and he walked around and picked up about every pot there. He was 14 years old, and he bought one pot, a $4 hanging planter that I made. And I think that I've been close to Gary in small ways ever since. We have our chat time now and then, and we have a love of Spanish and his trips to Cuba that I love hearing about. And I've traveled the whole world, but I've never been to Cuba, and I'm very excited to hear about what's happening and what's he doing there. And I admire Gary a great deal. And I also should say that Judy Manchester, Mary Cease, Mary Risley, a woman called Elsie Salonia, Marjorie Schultz for sure, they were so good with Gary O'Neill at different times in his life that you can't imagine. I could tell you 10 things that they did for that young man when he needed someone. And if you talk to Gary, he would say, absolutely, absolutely. And especially Judy Manchester. She was very closely in tune with what Gary was all about. And I can't say enough for her that, in fact, for many, many of our new members, Judy was the Miss Congeniality in the building. She was always curious. She had a great curiosity about new members, and she would come and tell us things that we had no idea about. But she got to know our new members, our class members. She was just there for them. She was just wonderful. She thought I should be a member because she was so hard on me. I don't know why, I really don't know.
I met her too.
Pardon?
I met her too. She scared me as well.
We had a lovely member called Camille Van Soen, very artistic. And Bob Brooks, Camille, and I decided that we would wash the floor in the key member wheel area. And Mildred and a bunch were just about to leave after Saturday cleanup. And Bob Brooks, Camille, and I were getting buckets and mops out. And Mildred is screaming at us that we can't wash that floor. We would cause mud, because it was a weaving, Venetian blind cord weaving. So there was this layer of dust and grime. But we thought we could scrape and wash. And we were going to divide it up in 3 and do some scraping and washing. And Mildred just didn't want us. She just was so rude to us. And that was the first Forewash committee, was Bob Brooks, Camille Van Soden, and Lois.
So thank you for your time with us this morning, Lois. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you for the experience. I was looking forward to it. And it's been a very rich part of my experience for a very long time. And thank you